You're listening to Sports Connections with David Smale, the show that brings you a fun and intimate look into connections throughout sports. Now here's your host, David Smale.
Every good broadcaster has a catchphrase, an expression they're best known for. For my old friend Dick Enberg, it was, "Oh my." Say Keith Jackson and people will respond, "Whoa, Nelly." Dick Vitale and "Awesome, baby" go together like hand and glove. For Verne Lundquist, the catchphrase is actually a pause. If you think back to some of his most famous calls, he let the broadcast breathe, only to punctuate it with expressions like "in your life" or "yes, sir," and we'll refer to those in a little bit here. If you don't remember those calls, Google them. Just Google Verne Lundquist and you'll see some videos and you'll be able to follow along and then prepare to be wowed. The list of sports he's broadcasted includes weightlifting, speed skating, college and pro football, college and pro basketball, golf, track and field, swimming and diving, bowling, boxing, and figure skating. Don't ask him about his favorite sport or his favorite broadcast partner. I've tried to do that and I didn't get an answer. Verne, welcome to Sports Connections.
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, my list of questions is shorter than usual because I want to give you plenty of time to tell stories like you've done so well for so many years. Let's start with your personal history. How did you get involved in broadcasting?
I'm an accidental broadcaster.
Accidental.
Absolutely accidental. Just a little bit of background. I love competition. I love sports, but I learned in junior high school, really, but there were indications even before that I wasn't an athlete. And that's a jarring realization for anybody in your adolescent years, if you realize there are tons of guys around you, women, who are better than you are at playing. And so my compensation was to write about it and ultimately to talk about it. Starting in junior high school, I wrote a column for a weekly junior high school letter called the Daily Eagle at University Junior High School in Austin. I continued that at Austin High School, and I continued that at Texas Lutheran University. And along the way, I had an indication, I had an interest. You mentioned my exposure to radio broadcasting. It came when I was in the 8th grade. And I was enamored of the whole scene. We tape recorded half-hour radio dramas. They were outlets for University of Texas radio majors. And they had some professional actors who came in, but it was the old thing, when they wanted to emulate horses' hooves, they had a thing with the sandbox and coconut.
Yeah.
And they pounded it. I mean, all this stuff that now you read about, I experienced it. And so I got enamored of that when I was in junior high. And I did public address work at Austin High School for basketball and enjoyed that. It was my way of being a part of the sport, even though I wasn't intimately involved in it. And it continued at college. So I got my first radio job at KWED, 1580 on your dial if you're looking from left to right? All that stuff. That was in Seguin, Texas. And I applied for the weekend job as a junior at Texas Lutheran. Didn't get it. Went back undeterred and applied for it my senior year in college, and I got it. And this is a long way to get to answer your question, but it helps explain, I think, how I ultimately got initiated into this business. I was hired by a guy named Stan McKenzie. We just lost Stan about a year and a half ago. He was a well-known broadcaster. He owned the station, and I was paid the princely sum of $1.05 per hour. And that was slightly below minimum wage,
yeah.
even back then. And I worked on weekends, Saturday and Sunday, and then majored in sociology. Well, when I graduated in '62, Rick Riley had a great phrase when he wrote a column about Shaquille O'Neal's posse when Shaquille was playing for the Lakers. And Rick Riley called them men of unclear purpose. And I thought of myself as a man of unclear purpose when I was trying to decide what to do. I have a degree in sociology, a minor in history, and my dad was a Lutheran minister. I looked up to him for all of his life, and I thought, well, I don't know exactly how this will ever apply, but while I'm trying to figure all this out, I was 22. What the heck? I'll attend seminary. Now, this is a parenthetical part of all this. I'm organizing all my files, reorganizing them, cleaning out stuff that goes back to the early 70s, really. I've got some stuff from the 60s. I found a letter that I had written as a college student to a professor of radio television at Lutheran School of Theology, at Union Theological Seminary, in New York City. And I was curious about a combination of somehow combining my interest in theology with my interest in radio, then radio, and now radio television. And he wrote me back. His name is Dr. John Bachman. I just saw this thing last week. And he said, here's my recommendation. So you really are exposed to what the demands of this profession are, this calling, go to seminary. And if you're so bidden to do so, graduate and then find out what you want to do. Then call me back and come here. So I took off for Rock Island, Illinois, and I spent 1 year at theological school in Rock Island. And along the way, I landed a summer replacement announcer's job at KROS in radio in Clinton, Iowa. That was in the summer of '62. And it was a very small market. That was 1340 on the radio dial, left to right. And we did stay on until midnight. In Seguin, we were off the air at sunset. But I spent a summer working at the radio station, getting ready for theological school for seminary in the fall. And I applied for a job at WOC Radio in Davenport, Iowa. For those of you who are dying of curiosity, WOC stands for World of Chiropractic. And it was owned by the Palmer family, who also owned WHO in Des Moines, and WHO famous. It's a great radio station. So is WOC, but that's where Ronald Reagan worked. Yep. And I got a job playing music to make out by 10 to midnight every night, and then I'd go back across the Mississippi to Rock Island and get ready for class. And I knew, David, within 6 weeks that my calling was not in the pulpit. I didn't have my dad's conviction. It's a wonderfully responsible job if you are fit for it. I didn't have the commitment to do that, and I realized that, but I was honor bound to stay with it for 1 year, and I did. I've got 18 hours of credit somewhere in the microfilm files at what is now called Lutheran School of Theology, better known, I think, the campus is as Augustana College in Rock Island. And along the way, I had 6 hours of Greek. That hasn't proven particularly significant in subsequent years. All of this is to say, I knew I wasn't going to come back to school.
Yeah.
I didn't know what to do. I landed a summer job at KTBC, radio and television in my hometown of Austin. And that's really where it started. That summer of '63, I was an FM disc jockey, replacing those who went on vacation. And that summer, the guy who had been the sports director, since the station went on the air when I was 12 years old, I knew of him certainly. And his name was Dan Love. And he took that summer job. He took a job at KPRC in Houston. And the job was open. And I thought, sports, radio, and television. My gosh. So I asked for and was given an audition. And you're not quite old enough to remember these days, but there was no videotape. There was no color television.
Right.
So I did the audition live and not into a tape. And then the program director was sitting in a viewing booth above the studio. And his name was Cactus Pryor. And he called me in. Afterwards, he said, that wasn't bad. I think you got some promise. And anyway, that kicked it off. And then I was in Austin for 3 years, San Antonio for a year, and then you work and you get set back and you work again. And on my third try, having been rejected twice, I got the job in Dallas. That led to the Cowboys. That led to ABC Sports, and ultimately, through a roller coaster decade, I was told by ABC, we're going to move in a different direction. Those are the dreaded words.
Yeah.
And so at 42, I got an offer to go to CBS. That obviously was the most significant thing in my career. So that's a 10-minute answer to a 30-second question.
No, that's perfect.
Oh, okay. Yeah, on my right. Yeah. Okay.
You and I first spoke back in maybe 2012, and I was doing a story for the Final Four program on the Duke-Kentucky game from 1992. And I alluded to that in the introduction. And you told me at the time of a flashback you had from that. Please tell that story.
Sure. That is still regarded by many as the greatest college basketball game ever played. I remember watching Sean McDonough and Bill Raftery in a 6 overtime game at the Big East tournament. And some were saying, that's it. And I thought, no, because you get jealous, right?
Yeah.
And then even more memorably, when Duke played Butler and Gordon Hayward was the star of Butler. And if he hits the bucket from midcourt and it went off the rim, if I recall, that's going to be the greatest game ever. And it just for those of us like Lenny Elmore and myself and Leslie Visser, who were involved in Duke, Kentucky, we're jealous of that little patch of basketball court that we have. I say that almost facetiously.
Yeah.
But
there's a little bit of truth to it.
yeah, there is. And I'm proud of the way we called it. I will get to the story about Calvin, Janet Hill, and Grant Hill. But just as an aside, for years, I never looked at the tape. And I was asked, well, why would you not, it was the greatest game ever. I had a feeling, a perception of the three of us, Leslie and myself and Len Elmore, that we were equal to the task. I didn't want to look at the tape and be disappointed and say, oh my God, why did you say that? And it was 2003, and Bill Raftery and I were doing a regional final in Minneapolis, and Bill called me, and we were in our respective rooms, Sunday morning, and he said, ESPN is rebroadcasting Duke, Kentucky. You need to pick it up. So I switched over and I watched the last part of the first half and then the whole finish to the game.
Yeah.
And I looked away and I thought, yeah, I don't need to be embarrassed about that. There were mistakes, as there are in any live telecast, but there was nothing egregiously in error. So anyway, to the point, in 1972, I was doing color. I'm sorry. It was my first year of doing the Cowboys radio play-by-play on their network. And the star running back was this guy named Calvin Hill, a number 1 draft pick in '69 out of Yale. He and his wife, Janet, had become friends of mine, and I knew they were expecting. So I said to Calvin, the week of the expected birth, when she gives birth, why don't you call me, let me know, boy or girl, and I'd like to announce it on my our 10 o'clock sportscast, newscast, really, at WFAA TV, where I was fully employed. And he called on Friday morning, October 5th, and he said, Janet, last night gave birth to Grant Henry Hill. And I announced it at 10 o'clock that Calvin and Janet were parents for the first time. Turns out to be the only time. And that Sunday afternoon, they played the Steelers at Texas Stadium. Game came down to the wire, Cowboys trailing a minute to go. Roger Staubach pitched it out to Calvin. He went right, pulled up, halfback pass, 50 yards. Ron Sellers dived, caught it. Cowboys win 17-13. Now, 20 years later, here we are. Calvin and Janet were sitting behind the Duke bench. Their son, whose name I had announced, whose birth I had announced on television, was now a 6'8" All-American sophomore, and he was about to inbound the ball. And he threw what, in my mind, was the basketball equivalent of a 50-yard touchdown pass. His went 70 feet, and it curved a little bit, but he caught Laettner, and Laettner turned around, and as we know, it took that 2.1 seconds when the ball was inbounded and hit the jumper, and that completed a perfect night for Laettner. 10 of 10 from the field, 10 of 10 from the free throw line, 7 rebounds, and he stomped on the stomach of Amino Timberlake midway through the second half, for which he in all probability should have been ejected, but regional final All-American, then tossing. And so after an appropriate time to let the celebration play out, I recapped over a replay that story of Calvin's birth. One other aside about that, David, I watched Krzyzewski, a man whom I know well and for whom I have enormous admiration. And he did something very classy. The game's over. He goes out. He embraces. He shook hands with Rick Pitino. He embraces his players. Then he, instead of going to the Duke radio broadcast booth, he peeled off and came back to our side and went on the air live with Kaywood Ledford, legendary Kentucky broadcaster, who had announced that whenever Kentucky lost in the tournament, that would be his last game. And I still get shivers thinking about Mike, because we had Leslie Visser 20 feet away from Kaywood for the last 8 minutes of the ball game and all of regulation. She was going to tell the story. The game was too compelling. She never got on. So here was Mike live with Kaywood Ledford, thanking him for everything he had meant to his university and to the sport and to the country. Yeah. Just a classy thing to do. So now, and there's a coda to all this. Grant, of course, is Turner Broadcasting, and now working with Bill Raftery and Jim Nance for us in the tournament. And I was at a seminar in New York City sharing the stage with Grant, Bill Raftery, Steve Smith, the great Michigan State player, with our combined Turner and SEC, with our combined group gathered. And I told that story about Grant. And he, in front of all these people, 300 people, I guess, he said, "I've never heard that before." And I said, "Trust me, it happened." Well, I saw him the next morning in the hotel at breakfast. And he said, "I talked to my mom last night. And she said, 'Yeah, you announced my birth.'" I said, "Grant, did you think I was lying to you?" No. So that story for me helps personalize that whole experience. And it certainly deserving of its place, I think, in the hierarchy.
Yeah, I do too. In fact, when I wrote that story for the Final Four program that year, that was my lead. I talked about the fact that you were sitting courtside and that 20 years earlier you had announced his birth, and that once again to a national audience you got to announce the arrival of Grant Henry Hill. And I got more comments about that Final Four story than any in the 14 years that I've been doing that. So I still think that's why I don't know how much time we're going to have for all of my questions, but I knew that needed to go first so we could talk about that one.
Sure.
You mentioned that your dad was a preacher. And did you get your speaking ability from him? You said you weren't called to be a minister, but did you get your ability to speak, your ability to tell stories from your dad?
I think so. I'm the oldest of five. I was born in Duluth, Minnesota, but my dad was serving as a student pastor before he entered seminary. That was in the summer of 1940. And we were only there for 2 months and went to theological school. He was ordained in 44. His first church was in Everett, Washington. And my oldest brother, I'm the oldest of five, as I said, David is 3 years younger than me. Dan, who lives in Austin, is 6 years younger. My brother Tom, who was probably the best of the bunch, we lost him tragically to an issue in 2004, and his widow is still very close to us. And then I've got a sister who lives in Lincoln, Nebraska. She's 16 years younger than me, but I'm the only one of the five who we moved to Texas when I was 12. And my brother and I, David, we used to be acolytes in his church. Acolytes meaning, ceremonially you would have robes on and walk in, light the candles and that sort of thing. And then our family always sat in the first or second row. And my mom and her brood, and believe me, we were expected to be there every Sunday. But he had a great speaking voice, and I think I inhabited that from him. Now, David, the rest of them, David, Dan, Tom, when he was alive, to a lesser degree, Sharon, they really grew up in Texas. I was 12 when we moved there. So what takes me 15 seconds to relate, it will take them 2 minutes. Because they, by God, can draw it out, I'll tell you. And I give them one of these. Wind it up, will you? I did just, yes, I did. And I think also, David, the comfortability in front of an audience. I've never had stage fright, and I think that's inherited. It was inherited and then learned from my dad. And obviously, I'm everlastingly grateful for that.
Yeah. So is that why you don't have a Southern accent? Because you were already 12 and had
Yeah,
developed speech patterns
I
where the
think
rest
so.
of them picked it up?
Yep.
Okay.
Nancy, my wife, 39 years, went to University of Texas. And before we got married, she made a living and made a good one as a radio television spokesperson. And there were three ladies in Dallas Fort Worth who dominated that market. And Nancy Miller was one of them. But she has just a little, born and raised in Dallas, went to University of Texas, married for the first time to a UT dentist. And she's got a little hint of Dallas. There's a little twang there, but
Yeah.
not irritatingly so, not at all. But and it can be irritating, as we all know. I think everybody knows, and even Texans would acknowledge that.
You were involved in broadcasting. You're still doing it because you were at the Masters just this past October, weren't you? At the 16th? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it was.
So you've been in broadcasting for more than 50 years. Does it seem that long?
Only when I try and get out of bed in the morning. Mentally, emotionally, no. It doesn't seem that long. Physically, yes, I can tell.
Yeah.
And my body is telling me, please slow down, take your time getting out of bed and going up the stairs. But mentally, no, and emotionally, no. And I'm in my retirement as such has been really orchestrated well by CBS. And matter of fact, I talked to my boss, Sean McManus, last night, just about a variety of things. And he and I reached a decision mutual in 2016 to make Army-Navy my last football game. We then mutually agreed to make March Madness in 2017 my last. And then, to my everlasting gratitude, Sean said, listen, you've got a legacy at the Masters. And as long as you're able, we would like to continue with Augusta and to PGA. I've done 35 Masters now and 20-something PGAs. I know I'm back at Augusta in April. I can't wait. I hope it's much more pleasant experience for all of us.
Yeah.
All of us than it was in November. The PGA, we'll see. And that's in part selfishness because I've been at the 16th hole now this will be my 21st or 22nd year. I guess 22nd. And I feel more a part of the history of Augusta than I do the PGA. As all of America knows, Gary McCord doesn't work the PGA for us anymore. And now he doesn't work for CBS. But and that didn't prompt my move to 16. But when you sit at one place as long as I have, and I cherish that spot. So Sean said, let's keep it going.
Yeah.
I think it's a funny thing. I was doing a radio talk show. This has been 8 years ago, maybe, with a guy in Atlanta. And he said, well, tell me, what are your plans as your career winds down? And I meant this. I said, I want to exit with my dignity intact before I make egregious mistakes on the air. And he said, buddy, that ship sailed a long time ago. And I caught his drift.
Yeah.
But I think, fortunately, the errors that I've made and as I said, David, we all make mistakes. I've never, ever, ever done a live sporting contest in which mistakes weren't made.
Yeah.
But the advent of the internet has made those much more noticeable.
Yeah.
But I'm very proud to say it. I sound almost antediluvian. I have no Twitter account. I have no Facebook account. I have no Instagram account. And I've made it to 80 years of age without those. I think I'm going to just keep sailing toward the sunset and not be bothered.
And maybe this isn't a fair question, but I'll ask it anyway, and you can tell me to go chip into the sand or whatever. But is it a little bit muscle memory that it would not, if the Masters went on and you weren't sitting up in that tower on 16, that it wouldn't feel right?
Oh gosh, yes. And I know that day's going to come, and it will be a mutual decision. I think every expectation I have, the way this whole process has been unveiled. I think, and it could be if I make mistakes on the air, and it's always a possibility. It's a live telecast,
right?
And when you're sitting there, there are a lot of balls being juggled, and you better. And I get asked a lot about the Tiger call in 2005. Well, I actually had a guy in the aftermath of that within an hour after that tournament ended. I was back in our compound office, and one of our senior vice presidents of communications, Leslie Ann Wade, said, "There's a call here for you." And I picked it up, some writer, I don't remember from where, but he said, "I want to talk to you about that call of Tiger's chip." Sure. Did you script that? And I thought, wait a minute. Yeah, I couldn't sleep. So I thought, what if he pulls it long and left and holds a miracle chip shot that sits on the lip for 1.8 seconds and then drops in? I think I'll say, in your life, have you ever seen anything like that? No. No, I didn't script it. But I do think one of our responsibilities, all of us, as storytellers and as live broadcasters, is to react as people at home are possible. We're a conduit. And what I was expressing in that moment was, it wasn't conscious, but thinking about it now, what I said was a reaction to what I just witnessed.
Yeah.
And it was an honest statement. I've never seen anything like that.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things we're called upon to do.
I mentioned in the introduction that you may be best known for the pause. And you and I've talked about this before. You know, the Iron Bowl game, when Chris Davis runs it back from 9 yards deep, you may have said in that, however long it took, 20 seconds, you may have said 5 sentences that were all short. He breaks a tackle, no flags, things like that. Talk about how that style of letting what the viewers are seeing, letting that tell the story, and you just adding phrases in there. How did that come about? Because that's certainly what you're known for now.
Sure. And I appreciate that because I want to be known for something like that. One of my role models, he wasn't a mentor, we weren't that close, but was Ray Scott. And in the pantheon of great broadcasters, and he was a great broadcaster, Ray Scott is almost an afterthought. And I hate that for his memory. But Ray was the master of minimalism. And here's a typical, he gained fame as a television broadcaster for CBS with the Green Bay Packers. And in those days, in the 60s, CBS assigned broadcasters to teams.
Right.
Frank Gleber, the late, often forgotten, great, and he was a mentor of mine. Frank did the Cowboys, and he did the Cleveland Browns for a while. But Ray was with the Packers in their absolute glory years. And here's a typical Ray Scott touchdown call. Star, Dowler, touchdown.
Yeah.
Well, they could see that.
Yeah.
And so I think I learned that from Ray. I've tried to incorporate it, oftentimes not successfully. We do all tend to get verbose. And I also learned in listening and becoming a friend with Pat Summerall. I think Pat was the greatest counterpuncher we've ever had. And I'm obviously, we all applaud John Madden for his contributions to our craft, but he would not have been what he became without Pat.
Yeah.
And John, they gave John the freedom. He's the greatest broadcaster in a blowout that I think we've ever seen.
Yeah.
And he had two guys in the truck, Bobby Stenner and Sandy Grossman, both, well, Bob's still living, but Sandy's gone now. And they let John go wherever he wanted to go. Well, he could do that because Pat was there to succinctly sum it up and bring him back.
Yeah.
Well, John is 3rd down 8. And Pat was great at that. So I tried to adopt that. I do remember, I share with you one memorable reaction to the Chris Davis touchdown thing. When he got to the 20, it was obvious to the world, or at least within the confines, that unless he tripped and fell on his shoelaces, he was going to score.
Yeah.
And as he crossed the goal line, I said, no flags. Now I've got a spotter who's there helping me.
Right.
And he's got a gesture. And if there is a flag, he'll go like this. And I know then there's a flag that I didn't see. And I said, no flags. And I looked to my right. And for that long, I thought, dear God, don't let there be any flags. And fortunately for history, there weren't any.
Yeah.
But no, I appreciate what you said because I tried not to overtalk it. My dear friend Gary Danielson, with whom I worked for 11 years, and I'm a college football addict.
Oh, yeah.
I watch the NFL, but I'm much more involved in college sports, basketball. And I had to read about the James Harden trade this morning because I didn't know the particulars. I just know he's going to Brooklyn Nets. And I thought, if David asked me about this, I need to be ready. So I read about it this morning. But I'm just much more a fan of college sports with all their warts, and there are many. And Gary called me year before last, I guess, in October. And I watched Brad and Gary and Jamie Erdahl every Saturday. And he said, well, how are you spending Saturday afternoons? And I said, Gary, you'd be proud of me. I'm now joining the ranks of millions of Americans. I wait for the theme music at 1:30 Mountain Time, 3:30 Eastern. I wait for you and Brad to come on camera. You say whatever you're going to say. And then I sit back, fix myself another Coke Zero, and I start yelling at the TV set. Will you please shut up? Why did you say something stupid like that? And I do so, David, in the knowledge that other guys in my craft are doing the damn same thing when I'm on the air.
Yeah.
And we all are overconfident and selfly critical, or not critical enough, actually. So we need those little reminders to come on back on the ranch.
Yeah. I know you won't pick a favorite sport. Dick Enberg told me one time when I asked him what his favorite sport said, he said, what season is it? And you're not going to pick your favorite, but did you have a favorite moment? And maybe it's the two we've talked about, the Iron Bowl in 05 or the 92 Duke Kentucky game. Is there one that sticks out in your mind as your all-time favorite call because of the moment that it happened in?
Yeah, there is. And it's the most succinct expression I've ever ushered on television, I think, in 57 years of doing this. And that was Jack in '86.
Yeah.
Just because it was Jack Nicklaus.
Yeah.
And as in 2005, it was Tiger Woods.
Yeah.
And I say this without, if Tom Kite, remains a good friend of mine in Austin, if Tom Kite had won that Masters and he had a chance, he could have tied at the 18th. People would have remarked on his victory, but because it was Jack. And I do remember this, David, as he was teeing off on 17, Seve Ballesteros put it in the water at 15 and began the act of self-destruction. And then Jack hit a poor tee shot. Yeah, he probably was wearing a poor t-shirt too. But he pulled his drive over to the left near the seventh green. But he had a wedge and they had a clearing. Now he puts it 12 feet. And we're bouncing around elsewhere, and Jack's walking. And I remember consciously thinking to myself, and obviously I've seen it replayed thousands of times. I've spoken with Jack about it, about that moment. And I thought, as he was walking, we're covered off somewhere else. This is Jack Nicklaus. He's 46 years of age. If he makes this putt, he's going to have the lead at the Masters with one hole to play. Keep it simple and get out of the way. And so those are kind of instructions to myself. And I did. And interesting now, I've been so blessed to have been presented with opportunities to verbally capture what we're seeing on the screen. And for the most part, I've whiffed on a couple of them, but for the most part, I've been equal to that task. And in the aftermath of the touchdown, Chris Davis's touchdown, Mike Vaccaro, who writes for the New York Post, called me. And he said, I'm doing a wrap up on Alabama Auburn. Where would you rank? Oh, I'm sorry. He wrote a column that Sunday after the game in which he said that Alabama Auburn was the greatest finish he'd ever seen in sports. And he's not a 23-year-old chipmunk journalist.
Right.
He's been around a while. And it caused me to reassess. And I thought, because I've always said Jack is unquestionably number one. And I talked to Mike about it. And I said, you wrote that column about Chris Davis' touchdown return. And I got to thinking, well, I'm still going to keep Jack at number one. But boy, I got a whole list of number twos. and really they're 1As.
Yeah.
And that's just luck to be presented with that opportunity.
Yeah.
And then you've got to hopefully be equal to it.
So my introduction was incorrect. That Jack's putt was on 17, not 16.
Right.
So, all right. So let me set the stage. I want you, just for those people who don't have Google at their fingertips, who don't know exactly what you said, I'm going to set the stage. Nicklaus is putting. If he makes his putt, he's got a one-shot lead with one hole to play. And I don't remember what, 14, 15 feet. And the putt's on the way, and we're throwing it to you.
It's about 1.5 feet away.
Okay.
And I said, maybe. And then it dropped. And I said, in a voice much louder than when I'm speaking in right now, yes, sir. And here's one of the things that Jack and I have talked about. And we did so at Augusta 1.5 years ago. The night of the champions dinner, they all meet upstairs, and we have friends who are members of the Augusta National. He's from Pittsburgh. He was president of Oakmont. And he and his wife, Lynn, Bill and Lynn invited Nancy and me to go to dinner. And as we were sitting there, the champions' dinner broke up and all the players came down in their jackets. We're mingling, and Jack was talking to Ben Crenshaw, and Ben and I have known each other for 40 years.
Another UT grad. Yeah.
And I mentioned to Jack in that conversation, because that putt, that moment gets replayed every year in our Open. It's because it's part of the history of Augusta, and it includes Jack Nicklaus. And I said, if next time you see it, go back and take a look. And this is where serendipity is involved. As I was saying, yes, sir, he's walking to the green, and he's got the putter raised. Now it's down, and as he reaches the green, almost simultaneous to my words, yes, sir, he's pumping the air. Yes, sir. And he's like a conductor giving a downbeat.
Yeah.
And that's just, how in the world does that happen?
Yeah.
Except it emphasized the expression I used.
Yeah.
And Jack, being Jack, he said, that's interesting. And that,
yeah,
he wanted to move on to more important things.
I got two last questions for you.
Sure.
I appreciate your time very much. I always enjoy visiting with you, and this is a different way than we've done it before, but I definitely appreciate it. Do you have a bucket list? And do you know what a bucket list is? And if you have one.
Not in the craft I pursued.
Right. But anything.
Yeah. Yeah. My wife and I, we do live a life outside of yard lines and free throws. We are very, very, very involved in a music festival. My wife was a voice major at the University of Texas, and she sang in her college choir at UT. I sang in my college choir at Texas Lutheran. And that gave us both an appreciation for what music means in our lives. So my bucket list would include wanting to see in person every great orchestra in the world. And we've done New York and Chicago. We haven't done Cleveland, but our music director here in December is a fellow named Michael Sachs. He's principal trumpeter with the Cleveland Orchestra. So we've got that invitation.
Yeah.
But we have seen Vienna.
Wow.
And I would like to see Berlin. And so that's one of them.
Yeah.
And it's still within reach. Once we get through this pandemic that we're all dealing with.
Yeah.
So that's one. And the other would be travel. We are inveterate travelers. We don't have children. We chose not to for professional reasons when we married, because we knew what our life was going to be like. It was going to involve a lot of airplanes. And I didn't want Nance saddled with the responsibility of raising kids if I'm on an airplane.
Yeah.
And I miss anyway, that was our basis. And for us, it was the right choice.
Yeah.
But we have given ourselves a chance to be a little self-indulgent. And so our wish, and we're fulfilling it now. Fortunately, we have financial obligations that have been taken care of. So just last week, in high hopes that we will all have vaccinations in our history and that things will open up, we booked a trip in October on a cruise line that we sail with. I have a working relationship. Here comes the commercial part of this conversation. and they'll appreciate the name drop here. But I've worked with Oceanic Cruises for the last 15 years. And I do what essentially are after dinner speeches with video. There's a lot of Jack Nicklaus in there and a lot of Tiger. Stories about them. And I use the video to supplement the anecdotes. And we usually do 1 or 2 a year. And it's taken us around the world. And we were in the middle of South America when this. So we booked this trip. Nancy's always wanted to go back to the Greek islands. We've been lucky enough to be there before. So we now are booked on a cruise line in October.
That's awesome.
And so we're lined up for our vaccinations, and we have high hopes that we'll get through this. And I think the world will ultimately, it may take a while. Yeah. But anyhow, so continued to travel. Yeah. But in terms of my craft, no. I don't, well, you never got to do a Super Bowl. No. But those are decisions way beyond my control. And so I have no unfulfilled aspirations in terms of going to another sporting event.
Right. It's interesting. The first bucket list item, I got to fulfill one of mine, not in December of last year, obviously for pandemic reasons, but in December of 2019, I got to sing with the Kansas City Symphony Choir, perform the Messiah with the Kansas City Symphony Orchestra. And I kept saying, I'd be there for practices, and especially when we were at the Kaufman Center for Performing Arts, and I'm dressed in a tuxedo, and I was like, who does not belong here? But as long as they let me in, I'm going to sing.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, one of the highlights of my career, my life, not a career, because of our association with our music, and we do, I could go for an hour and a half on Strings Music Festival. Yeah. I've been on the board for 31 years, and we have term limits. So they put me off the board every 7 years. And then in a year, they say, why don't you come back? So I've done that. But one of our former music directors here is a violinist. His name is Andres Cardenas. And he is now director of music, professor of music, chair of the music department at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
And 3 years ago, he called and invited me to come back and do a narration of Mozart's last letters to his father with the Carnegie Mellon Orchestra.
Wow.
Directed by Manfred Honig, who is the music director of the Pittsburgh Symphony. And that gave me chills. I mean, in the middle of the orchestra, I've got, and it wasn't a lengthy piece, but what a thrill to be said. That's one of the highlights of my life, to do that. So sometimes you can forget about X's and O's. And,
for sure.
And life becomes more fulfilling.
Yep. All right. Last question for you. What advice would you give a young broadcaster just starting his or her career that may not last 57 years, but what advice would you give?
Never turn down anything. The world in which I've lived for so long is now filled with young men and young women who aspire to be anchors on ESPN. My suggestion of them is, before you, and that's a worthy aspiration if that's your bent, but learn your craft first.
Yeah. And
you do that by accepting everything. In my early years, I was a one-man band.
Yeah.
Even in Dallas, David, I ultimately had a staff photographer, but when I started in Dallas, a typical winter's night would be, okay, do the 6:30, the 6 o'clock, off at 6:30, take a Bell and Howell camera, go out to State Fair Coliseum, and shoot 100 feet of film, black and white, of the Dallas Blackhawks hockey team, and you hope that they score a goal or something meaningful in 100 feet of film, which, by the way, lasts 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Okay. And then take another 100 feet of film and go out to Moody Coliseum, where SMU was playing, and shoot 100 feet of film there. It's something of a highlight. Take the car back downtown to Memorial Auditorium, where the Dallas Chaparrals, who are now the San Antonio Spurs, were playing. And I'd get some shots of Cliff Hagan, the player coach, and then go back, put it in the soup, as we call it, process it all. And then you've got 30 minutes to zip through 100 feet of film and splice it together, and then rush it to the control room. Yeah. And the guy says, you got 4 minutes, you're on here. And so I'm known around Channel 8, even now, for my scripts, would say, Verne on camera, BS about Chaparrals. Verne back on camera, BS about Dallas Blackhawks. Because you learn, you don't have time to sit down and type out a nice script. So all of that came into play for me. And don't ever think, Frank Gleber, I mentioned his name earlier, a dear, dear friend. And we lost him tragically at 51 years of age. He was so gifted. And Frank graduated from Northwestern. And I shared a radio booth with him at the Cowboys for 1 year. And I knew he couldn't ski. He thought he could play basketball. Pushed the buzzer on that one. But he accepted, and I learned this from Frank, and I've applied it. Yeah. Frank was assigned to the World Cup ski races in some little mountain town. There are mountains in Sweden. And I talked with him before he went. It was for CBS. And I thought, Frank Gleber doing skiing? Well, I watched that program with a critical eye. Because he learned the jargon, learned the rules, and then borrow real liberally. Don't be afraid to borrow something. Don't plagiarize it. Right. But don't be afraid to learn from others who've been there before. Yeah. And those are lessons that I still apply. Yeah. How did I get through figure skating? Well, believe me, I've never been on ice skates, but I was with Scott Hamilton.
Yeah, he knows a little bit about skating.
He does, and he taught me what he could. I have one little quick anecdote. Our first event ever was the World Junior Championships at the Broadmoor in Colorado Springs. We'd met each other, but and I thought, wow. And then we were assigned, now we were in the big leagues. We went to Leningrad, Russia, and we did the European Figure Skating Championships. And Scott realized right away, based on our 1 week in Colorado Springs, I didn't know squat about his sport. And you watch practice, you get a jump sheet, and then you pray for the best. And we worked out a system, and we got through 3 Olympic Games this way. By the third one, I was cocky enough to think, well, I could do that. Yeah. But if there was a significant moment coming up, a jump, he would reach over with his left hand and put his left hand on my right forearm. And that meant to me, shut up. Yeah. Lay out, let me handle it. And we did that through Albertville, France. We really did it in Lillehammer with Nancy and Tanya. And then by Nagano in 98, I got arrogant and almost showed my rear end with that. But
well, I remember, you talk about that. I remember the first time I saw you on the Olympics or heard you, I guess, on the TV on the Olympics thinking, and he's got so much experience. He's done this. And now he's going to do figure skating. And I remember afterwards going, man, this guy can do anything. He even knows figure skating. So you pulled it off, and you know, I think maybe the best skill you have, other than knowing when to pause, is knowing how to work with a partner who knows more about that particular subject than you do. That
is the key. It is the key. Set them up, get out of the way. David Michaels, Al's little brother, was our figure skating producer through the first year I did this sport. And he said of me, here's what I want you to do. You're sitting with an Olympic champion. Don't leave him out there to dry. Yeah. Use him. And I want you to introduce the skaters, do some biographical things, let the music play. This is a visual sport.
Yeah.
And give Scott the room to really comment on it. In the middle, when it slows down, tell an anecdote. Keep it, personalize them. And then when they finish, wrap it up and give it back to Scott. Well, pretty simple.
Yeah.
If you follow advice, and I did.
Yeah.
And
simple, but not easy. As a professional broadcaster, to say, I'm not going to talk now because that guy knows more. That's not an easy thing to accept, but you did that so well. So, well, it's been a pleasure. We've blown through an hour, believe it or not, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. It's always good to connect with you, and I just appreciate you being a guest today.
Thank you, David. Thanks very much.
Thanks for listening to Sports Connections with David Smale. Make sure to subscribe, follow, and rate the show from your favorite podcast platform. You can learn more about David Smale and his work by visiting davidsmalebooks.com. Don't forget to join us weekly for new episodes. Until next time.